Committee. I'm Chairman Buscaino. I'm joined by Mr. Krikorian and Mr. Bonin. Today's Tuesday, March 5th, 2019. Again, we welcome you all. Welcome to listeners on Council Audio. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. With that, I'd like to turn to general public comment. I don't see any speakers for general public comment. We will now close general public comment. And colleagues, if I can direct your attention to today's agenda, I'd like to take on consent items 5 through 10, unless you want to hold any of these items on the desk. Okay, hearing none. Without objection, we'll approve items 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 without objection. Send those to council. Okay, with that, let's now take item number 1.
Good afternoon, John White, City Clerk. Item 1, communication from the Mayor relative to the appointment of Ms. Diane Middleton to the Board of Harbor Commissioners for the term ending June 30, 2019.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton. Please come forward. And before we allow you to say a few words and ask some questions, I do want to recognize Commissioner Lucia Moreno Linares, who is here. And a number of key executive members from Mr. Soroka's team here at the Port of Los Angeles. It seems like you have a great show of support here, Diane. I'm excited about this recommendation from Mayor Garcetti, and I'll tell you why. We have before us, colleagues, a resident of San Pedro for many, many years who has a profound love and respect for our community, an advocate for justice, social justice, environmental justice, a workers' right advocate, someone who is no stranger to serving this city and has served other commissions over the years. And this recommendation from Mayor Garcetti will fill the vacancy created by the passing of our brother, Dave Arian. And we know those are some big shoes to fill, but no other person can fill those shoes I feel than you. So with that, Diane, tell us a little bit about yourself, why you've agreed to serve on the Harbor Commission, and your goals in the next few months, because I believe this term ends on June 30th, 2019. Now, if you do a great job,
Sort of probationary.
It's probationary period, right? We can reconsider something beyond June 30th. So tell us why you want to do this. If you can just speak into the microphone, please.
Thank you, Councilman. That was indeed my first question. Is this a placeholder appointment, or should I plan on staying for a while? I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, attended schools in Detroit, moved to California briefly in the early 70s, moved to San Pedro in 1978, so I just barely have passed the time where I would be considered a newcomer. I truly, truly love San Pedro. When Mayor Garcetti was first elected and wanted to know if I was interested in a commission appointment, I said, not if it takes me outside of the harbor area. So this was just as perfect as could be, and I'm very enthused. I've been an attorney for 40 years. I retired 10 years ago. During that period of time when I was in California, in Southern California, I limited my law practice to representation of injured longshoremen and shipyard workers, including hundreds of people with asbestos disease. I also was involved in various community organizations and had the privilege of serving on 2 other city commissions, Housing and the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. The first thing that I think has to be said, although I've actually used that phrase a couple times now, is that there is no one that will ever replace Commissioner Arian. He did an outstanding job. I was proud to call myself his friend for over 40 years, and I am simply hoping that I will be able to do the best I can and learn everything and put into practice everything that I learned through being his friend for so many years. I'm committed to the expansion of the port, but not at all costs. Having represented longshoremen and knowing what I know about the port, I know how important it is to the regional economy and indeed the national economy, But I also am committed to seeing the port grow in an environmentally sound way and in a way that takes into account the needs of the surrounding community, including the utmost protection for the workforce, but also the growth of small business and the impacts on the community, primarily San Pedro and Wilmington. I'm committed to seeing that Wilmington gets its fair share. We've had a lot of stuff in the news about waterfront development and ports of call, the new San Pedro public market, but I feel strongly that development in Wilmington is equally important, and I'm delighted to see the plans for the Wilmington waterfront project. So, having said that, I wouldn't take too much more of your time, except to say I welcome any of your questions. I consider it a privilege to be able to serve in this capacity. I'm very excited about developments in the port and in San Pedro and Wilmington, and I thank the mayor and will thank the city council hopefully after tomorrow morning for confirmation and moving forward. Thank you, council members.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton, and thank you for agreeing to serve. A couple questions that I have. You and I met yesterday, and again, you're no stranger to the port. You're no stranger to how it operates, and you're also no stranger to protecting the workers of the port. So for my first question is, here in the next several weeks, we're going to be discussing, or the Port Commission is going to be discussing the future of work and how potential automation can impact not only today's ILW worker, but future longshoremen and women. So give me your thoughts on how can we balance the need of both preserving the future of work and also ensuring that the port remains the number one port in the country?
We are fortunate that there's a concept that increasingly has come to the forefront in dealing with this question, and it's one called just transition. When I first heard of just transition, I thought of it with reference to oil refinery workers and the need to transition from fossil fuels. But as I read, particularly over the last couple of years, I quickly understood that the real just transition is what happens to the workforce as robotics increasingly take precedent over human labor. I think there has to be a balance, and I think that transition is a very good word, because that's the key concept. It cannot be done suddenly, it must be done thoughtfully, and there must be consideration given to all of the impacts. And those impacts are many. And since I am a community resident in the harbor, I've lived in San Pedro all those years, I know that our local economy is very dependent on longshore jobs. It's a huge payroll, and it simply cannot be withdrawn without thought given to how this is going to happen. I'm a student of history. I just love the way the word Luddites sounds, because I think it's so important that the people, of course, who smashed their machines in the 19th century, right?
That's kind of an insight.
That, of course, we don't want to take that position. There was a time when containerization was considered revolutionary, and that it would replace human labor and longshoremen would be displaced. And when I thought about it, I thought, well, no, that's a great idea. I saw how many people were injured slinging bananas, stalks of bananas and lifting 40-pound boxes at the rate of several thousand an hour. And I understood that human labor-saving devices are fine. The only question is, what happens to the humans? And what happens to their families and how they support those families and their dentists and their dry cleaners and the grocery store. So we have to take all those into account. So my approach to automation would be certainly to express an interest in technology, to want to learn more about it, but to make sure that it is implemented in a very, very thoughtful way that takes into account all the ramifications.
Yep, thank you for that. Let's talk briefly about environmental justice. We have seen a port has, in the last 10 years, seen a reduction in NOx and SOx, I would say over 80%. You live a stone throw away from the port. The Cleaner Action Plan, as a commissioner, what are you going to do to continue to embrace our Cleaner Action Plan and call for a zero emissions port by 2035?
Well, since I haven't been confirmed yet, the first thing I'm going to do is listen to staff and hope that they have some good suggestions on how to accomplish this. I do believe, again, that it is possible to have cleaner air, cleaner water, a cleaner environment. Has to be done in a thoughtful way. It shouldn't be just willy-nilly expansion of cargo handling, although I was very taken by the quick summary of you can't do good in the community if the port isn't making money, and the port makes money from moving cargo. So you have to move cargo. You just have to do it in a clean and safe way. Now, I have many friends in the environmental movement who are fairly critical of the port and say not enough has been done. If we look at the rates of lung cancer, if we look at the rates of other occupationally related disease, and the prevalence of those concentrated in the harbor, of course we would have to say we haven't done enough. Doesn't mean that we haven't done anything. So I want to take a balanced view and look at everything that's been done, argue that we can do a lot more, and find the smartest, safest way to do it.
Appreciate that, Diane. And then lastly, and then I'll turn to my colleagues, you mentioned briefly in your opening remarks the importance of continuing on our waterfront redevelopment efforts. I take a line from our colleague Mike Bonin when he calls out the airport on being a world-class airport, first-class neighbor. And I steal that line oftentimes, Mike. I don't know if you copyright it just yet.
As long as you keep contributing.
Okay, fantastic. So how, in a time where we're seeing amazing numbers, world-breaking numbers on the number of containers coming in and out of the port, the community investment plan that we're seeing, a certain percentage of those dollars are going to be filtered into community projects, how would you ensure that the port is a world-class port and a first-class neighbor moving forward?
I think, we briefly alluded to it already, that there are two components to that. One is the movement of cargo and doing it in a safe, a safe way that protects the environment. And the other is looking at the needs of the community and also the regional area in terms of the tremendous draw that we hope the San Pedro Public Market will be. And I think those two are not antagonistic concepts. I've seen the plans. I've been to all the public meetings for the San Pedro Public Market, and I'm delighted to see that it does not attempt to, if you will, build beach communities in the desert, but rather looks at what we have, which is a thriving port, and use that port concept to develop the San Pedro Public Market. And that I'm delighted when I see containers are being used, because the biggest draw is seeing these massive cargo ships. I mean, anybody who doesn't think that's one of the most exciting things, and when you realize it's our direct connection to globalization, and what the economy is really about is understanding globalization and how to work with it. And we have it right at our doorstep, and we want to share it, but we want to do it in a way that, again, protects the community so we're not inundated, and just has a balanced approach to all these things.
Thank you, Diane. I'll turn it over to colleague Mike Bonin, who has, I don't know if you have any issues, concerns with this appointment.
None that I'll speak for the record. This one's hard. I made it through the adjourning motion fine, but this one's kind of tough. I brought something of Dave's to the meeting today. I was just going to say how pleased and enthusiastic I am about this. Dave would be very proud that such a strong voice for labor, such a strong voice for the community, such a staunch progressive. I think he'd be pretty freaking stoked that it's going to be a female majority on the board. And he would be just beyond happy that it's you filling his shoes. So I'm glad to support this. Thanks, John.
Mr. Krikorian?
Thank you. Well, Ms. Middleton, after only 40 years in San Pedro, I hope this appointment will give you an opportunity to get to know the community a little bit. So, welcome. But looking at your background and the lifelong commitment you've had to, labor, to civil rights, it and your work on Bonk and your commitment to neighborhood concerns as well, it all kind of made me feel as though, well, that one of the hardest things in overseeing the port, like with the airport, is dealing with all these false conflicts, labor versus the environment, neighborhood versus economic development and expansion. And a lot of times we're stuck in the position of trying to choose sides between those things. But it's clear that your lifetime of experience is going to enable you to find where those balances are to meet the needs of all. And I was hopeful of that from what I had read. And in the 5 minutes that I've heard you speak, I've just been kind of wowed by your ability to string all those things together and put it into a historical context and a larger context about changes in the national economy. And I think you'll be a spectacular leader on this commission. And I'm thrilled to welcome you. And I think, to Mike's point, I think this is an appointment that your predecessor would be very proud to support as well, and as we should be as well. So,
Full disclosure, she's usually not that brief.
Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. Okay, so with that, without objection, we will move this recommendation, the appointment of Ms. Middleton to the Board of Harbor Commissioners to full council. And we congratulate you and thank you for taking on this role and this responsibility. And we'll see you tomorrow morning, full council. Thank you. Thanks so much, Diane. Appreciate it. Thank you. I do want to recognize Ms. Marla Blevins is here, a Deputy Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles. And as I mentioned earlier, she's joined by a number of the executive team here representing Mr. Shiroka. So thank you again. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, with that, let's now take item number 2.
Item 2, motion
No,
Buscaino
continue.
Martinez instructing the LADWP to report relative to land swap negotiations with the Port of Los Angeles, the next steps required to execute the land swap agreement, any outstanding roadblocks preventing the execution of the land swap agreement,
Okay.
and the capacity of and current and future usage of the LADWP tank farm in Wilmington.
Thank you, John. So with that, we have an official agreement between the Port of Los Angeles and the LADWP on this land swap. And we've come far from getting to this point. So I would now ask that we receive and file item number 2 that's before us.
Very good.
Okay, without objection, that'll be the order. I do actually, back to item number 2, Anna Dragon, my port liaison, she was just relentless on this. I do want to thank her publicly for just staying on top of this issue and working hand in hand with Mike Galvin and his team at the Port of Los Angeles, as well as the folks at the DWP. So thanks, Anna, for your dedication to this issue. Okay, with that, let's now take item number 3.
Item 3, City Control Report relative to the Industrial, Economic, and Administrative Survey of the Port of Los Angeles, including an analysis of cargo real estate and terminals, commercial real estate, and department management.
Okay. Is Ms. Matera who's here? How are you? Another fine San Pedran, Mr. Krikorian.
I was going to ask if I would get extra credit for being born and raised in San Pedro.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Everybody does around here.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Well, good afternoon, council members. I'm Georgia Matera, Chief Deputy Controller for the Controller's Office, and I'm here to just give a brief introduction for you on the Port IEA study. The Port IEA was released on January 24th of 2019 per Charter Section 266. Charter Section 266 states that the Controller, the Council, and the Mayor shall jointly cause and at least once every 5 years an industrial, economic, and administrative survey to be made of the business and property of each of the harbor, water and power, and airports departments. Our representatives from the CLA included Mandana Kateb-Shahidi, Matthew Shade. We had David Reich from the mayor's office, and from the controller's office was myself and Shane Min, who's in the audience. Our consultant is BCA Watson Rice, and we have them next to me, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and go over the report with you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome.
So my name is Scott Bryant. I'm the partner in charge of management consulting for BCA Watson Rice, and let you introduce yourself.
My name is Jim Brennan. I'm a partner in Capstan Consulting LLC, which is a strategy and management consulting firm that specializes in the international trade and transportation industry, and we are a subcontractor to BCA Watson on the project.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
We also had a few other members of our team. We had the former director of real estate for the Port of San Diego. We also had an IT specialist as well. So we brought a fairly strong team to the to this project. Let's see now, how do I go to the next? There we go. So as Georgia mentioned, the IEA survey is something that's required of the proprietary departments to be done every 5 years, and it's overseen or conducted by the joint administrators, as she mentioned. I will mention that they got very good guidance and advice from Marla Blevins, who was played a key role in that as well. They developed the scope and gave that to us to pursue, and the key elements of that, one was the business model and potential enhancement opportunities. Another was looking at real estate operations and revenues, and then there were some selected management functions and processes. We'll just give you a very brief overview of our key recommendations, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions. So probably the most important recommendation is to really build on what's been going on for probably several decades, which is the collaboration between the two ports in the San Pedro Bay, the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach, and really to continue to build on that, but maybe even accelerate that to improve the competitiveness of the two ports, optimize individual investments in a more balanced way, and really sustain the economic contribution to the region by the two ports. Second is to do an alignment to the pricing strategy and tactics. The shipping industry has gone through a lot of changes,
Right.
and there needs to be some realignment in the pricing strategy and so on. Then also, continue to identify development opportunities along the waterfront and begin the planning process for those opportunities. We also felt that there should be more of an assessment of the impact of the current investments and the public access infrastructure improvements that are both underway and planned. Then within the port complex, the Harbor Department does a very rigorous job of protecting its own assets from cyber threats, but we were concerned about potential threats throughout the rest of the port complex. So we felt that the Harbor Department could play a stronger role in ensuring security of those assets. And then the last of our key recommendations is to better define strategic business requirements relative to information technology and really in a more cohesive manner pursue developing systems that will meet those needs. So those are our overall recommendations. Again, we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Appreciate this. It's okay, Commissioner. Good.
Very pleasant view.
Lovely ringtone.
So, in reviewing the report, really took a deep dive into the recommendations from, of course, modernizing our port as well as ensuring that the goods movement continues to flow in and out of our port to remain competitive. I also identified the important collaboration between all of our stakeholders, as well as the importance of keeping our port secured. Chief Gazy's here as well. He's leading the nation's finest maritime law enforcement agency. Thank you, Chief, to the men and women at the Port Police Department. So for me, again, going back to one of the reasons why I ran for this office, to ensure that the Wilmington to San Pedro waterfront developments take shape and move without any hesitation and delay. On page 20 of your report, you've talked about the mixed-use residential and creative office development that can fuel more interest in waterfront commercial development. You've also recognized the obstacles, and we down know well that those obstacles continue to be what I feel is an archaic tidelands trust. And you clearly mention in your report the Tidelands Trust, and I'm quoting here on page 20, the Tidelands Trust generally excludes residential uses and non-marine related office businesses. But the Port of San Francisco's recent development provides some examples of potential development exceptions to the Tidelands Trust restrictions, including general office and residential uses. So why in the heck are we still caught up if we know that there is already some best practices and developments to our neighbors to the north? And your recommendation says to provide, evaluate potential options for overcoming development obstacles for creative office space and mixed-use development. And this is something that I'm excited about. There also are some environmental impacts, but I feel with today's technology, including the SOC technology, that there's no reason why a container ship that's not amped equipped, and I'm talking out of the port staff, there's no reason why today a container ship that's not amped equipped cannot utilize some existing technology, and that's the SOC technology, the bonnet system. And I know the fruit dock is adjacent to the marina pads there, as well as Altasea and Warehouse 1. That fruit dock is a critical piece to our longshore work, and that should not be touched. I agree. But with the bonnet technology, if there is an opportunity there to invest in mixed-use development, we can clearly use that bonnet technology to cap those emissions while the fruit ship is at dock. So I'm encouraged by your report, specifically with these recommendations. I even like to offer potentially port staff to come forward if you want to respond to the recommendation is to look at these types of residential and creative office developments. I don't know if Marla wants to come speak, or thank you for joining us.
Thank you. We were very pleased with the work done by BCA Watson and Capstone Consulting. We feel that the recommendations provide a lot of food for thought for the port, as well as a pathway on a number of issues that we've been grappling with, particularly in the usage of technology and how to improve operations at the port and to improve cybersecurity, not just for ourselves, but also for the entire port complex. We spent a lot of time talking about diversification of revenue opportunities for the port, but ultimately it comes down to, we are primarily a container port. We will diversify where we can and where it makes sense to do so. But that's where our, 80% of our revenues come from moving cargo. And we've got to focus on doing that in a way that is as safe and sustainable and environmentally compliant as possible.
Thank you for that. This also stood out to me on page 22 that on the waterfront event development and marketing. Appreciate you shining a spotlight on this. We've come a long way in the last 6 years on bringing visitors from both local and regional and national and global visitors to our waterfront based on the amount of programming that's taken shape over the years. But you indicate a fact that the LA waterfront captures a very small part of the overall tourism in LA, with about 2.4 million visitors in 2016. I believe we've moved the needle in the last couple years. But how is that when we have an incredible water line with majestic views, with amazing instant entertainment? You see the global economy move right at the fingertips. I know we're going to get there with the St. Peter Public Market and now the Marina Pads and Warehouse One potentially. But I'm just throwing that out. But I appreciate you making that known. But our work is still not done. You also mentioned the number of visitors to events on the LA waterfront is increasing, up about 63,000 in 2013 to 270,000 in 2017. So we are making strides in identifying and marketing the LA waterfront. Amazing work that's been done by the port. So we just want to recognize that effort as well. So colleagues, I'll turn it over to you. Any questions, comments on this report before you from the Controller's Office?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question with regard to the cybersecurity point that you made. Good to know that the Harbor Department itself has good grades in that regard, but the concern is with the tenants. Can you talk a little bit about what sort of best practices other ports implement to ensure a higher degree of cybersecurity by the tenants, that we have some enforceability with regard to which we have some degree of enforceability?
Yeah, I think there's several options. There's always kind of the carrot and the stick approach, the two approaches. I think we would recommend more of the carrot approach. And one of the things that has occurred within the Harbor Department is that you do have a lot of cybersecurity expertise and infrastructure. And so I think our main thought was that that could be a potential service to be provided to port tenants to go in and help them do a cybersecurity assessment and to come up with solutions to strengthen their individual cybersecurity infrastructure and approaches and so on. So that's really the main approach. Another approach is more the stick approach, which would be to include requirements for cybersecurity in lease documents and those types of things as they're negotiated. But I do think the first approach would probably be the most effective.
Well, it seems they're not mutually exclusive. And
Correct.
I would think that
Correct.
for most of these tenants, it's very much in their own business interests
Certainly.
to guarantee a high degree of cybersecurity, and if we're willing to help them with that, that is only beneficial to them.
Exactly.
I believe you asked the question, how do we compare to best practice in the industry?
Yeah.
There is no best practice in the international port industry today. 3 years ago, this was an issue that wasn't even recognized in the international port industry. About 2 years ago, the world's largest container shipping line, Maersk, a long-standing customer of the Port of Los Angeles, and its terminal operating subsidiary, APMT Terminals, which is the largest tenant of the Harbor Department, actually had their entire global network shut down because of a virus that
Right.
quite innocently found its way into their systems, and that was really sort of the first time that ports realized that there was a vulnerability out there that heretofore people hadn't appreciated. And the opportunity from our perspective for the port is that they have an infrastructure, a hardware infrastructure, a fiber network that provides an ideal foundation upon which to try and merge best practice between our tenants and the port and our shipping line customers and all people in the supply chain, includes trucking companies, logistics companies, and railroads on this single platform to be able to try and deal with a collective approach to improving cybersecurity, and that's really sort of the context of the recommendation.
Great. Thank you. One of the other key challenges was that the Harbor's business operations systems have not kept up with requirements, and you make the recommendation to evaluate business process and system requirements across divisions and develop a blueprint for data and systems requirements. Is that are you identifying a potential risk there, or did you observe operational problems, inefficiencies that that have grown out of that? And if so, what sorts of things were those?
The risk, I would say, is a competitive risk and an efficiency risk. It's not a risk in a traditional, financial risk or a market risk per se. The port industry globally has lagged the entire world from an IT perspective and the application of IT. It's gotten much better. I think the real challenge is for the Harbor Department and many of its fellow competitors in the port businesses. Historically, IT systems have defined how they're used, as opposed to the other way around, which is let's step back strategically, look at the business, decide what it is we really need to accomplish in order to sustain success. And I would emphasize sustain success as it relates to the Harbor Department, not strive for success, sustain it. And the idea is let's take the strategic perspective of where we need to be in 10 years, define what that means in terms of information requirements and how we manage that information, and then incrementally improve the information system, software, and hardware to be able to deliver that information in a timely, accessible, accurate format.
So, and a lot of the risk, as Jim mentioned, is the competitiveness, and it's having adequate information to make good decisions quickly. There's a lot of information that's out there, but pulling it together, compiling it takes an awful long time. And, trying to get the information that the board needs or the executive management needs to make good decisions is sometimes difficult.
But I'm gathering this is kind of a industry-wide
Correct.
issue. It isn't identification of a
This
particular
is not
breakdown.
unique
in
to the
port.
Harbor Department. It's not unique to the U.S. port industry. It is unique to the global port industry.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. I just had another question on our commercial real estate assets. How do we differ with the other ports up and down the state of California on how we manage our commercial assets compared to San Diego, San Francisco, Oakland?
I just want to make sure I understand when you say commercial assets, are you talking about the marine terminal cargo handling facilities?
I'm sorry, no, I'm sorry. More so the RD,
Commercial
real estate, yeah. Retail, dining, entertainment.
If you would have asked that question a few years ago, there would be significant differences where the Harbor Department managed all of their real estate as one portfolio. And in the last few years, they've kind of split that, where now you have the cargo side and you have the commercial side. And I think we cited in our report that was a major improvement. So there's much more active management of the commercial real estate, which, obviously they're significantly different assets than the cargo handling real estate. So that's a major difference. I think we lay out in substantial detail in the body of the report, some of the differences in approach and so on. I think that the Harbor Department is certainly comparable. There were a few areas that there may be some improvements in policies or practices, but I think that with the creation of the commercial real estate development division, they made just huge gains.
Yeah, for sure.
And that definitely should be recognized.
Got it.
I think the single largest differentiator, if you look at Seattle and you look at San Francisco and you look at San Diego, who are probably in the forefront of commercial real estate development, they have had the luxury of dealing with unmet demand,
Right.
whereas in the case of the Harbor Department, we're trying to create demand.
Right.
So
And
they're
that's the
very
biggest
different
challenge.
markets, and that is the difficulty. I mean, Port of San Diego, and San Francisco, especially, and again, Seattle, definitely major differences, in just what the marketplace is like there versus here.
Yeah, we've talked about our downtown is 25 miles north of our port, whereas
Seattle's right there.
San Francisco,
San
right.
Diego.
So
Well, quite
let's
frankly-
build a downtown, damn it. Come on, Paul.
Just move the whole
And
thing.
I think your point is very well taken, because, I mean, if you look at the substantial number of tourists
Right.
who come to Los Angeles, they never see the waterfront. You
Well,
take
sorry.
that same number of tourists who come to San Francisco, Seattle, or San Diego, they're on the waterfront.
That's
while
prime
they're also
destination.
visiting the other tourist attractions. And that's a very significant difference.
One of your challenges.
Yeah, but you mentioned since 2015, our commercial real estate division was created, and since then we've seen significant progress both on the Wilmington and San Pedro side. But yet it's still frustrating. We're seeing significant commercial development, residential development in downtown LA, which is great for our city, and in the west side. Last time I checked, downtown LA doesn't have a main water channel going through it. So we're on our way forward. I do know Mike Galvin has taken on this critical role, and I'm looking at Marla, that continues to push for these types of developments to occur along the waterfront. But how many people does he have under him? 14 people. Yeah. How many people work for the container shop side? Okay. Really, I thought there was a lot more. Okay. But we have a port now who's committed to seeing this through, and this is something that we've been really grateful with the direction of the mayor and Mr. Soroka and his entire team. So, really appreciate the report. And I do have one recommendation I'd like to add, and that is to direct the CAO, correction, I'd like to request the Harbor Department, with the assistance of the Chief Legislative Analyst, submit a written report within 60 days with the response to each individual recommendation provided in Section 1, which is the cargo real estate and terminals, and Section 2, the commercial real estate of the 2019 LA Harbor Department Industrial, Economic, and Administrative Survey. So we're going to work together with the port as well as the Chief Legislative Analyst of CLA's office for these types of hear back from these recommendations that you have in your report. Okay, so without objection, that'll be the order. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you. Okay, we held number 4, item 4 now before us. If you can read that into the record, then I'll defer to Mr. Bonin, who has some questions.
Item 4, Board of Airport Commissioners Report and CO2 Report relative to the First Amendment to Los Angeles World Airport's contract with Clean Energy to increase the contract authority by $640,000 for a new total amount not to exceed $1.6 million, and to extend the term by 5 years for liquefied natural gas for Los Angeles International Airport.
Hello. I think you know what I'm going to ask, but I'll put it bluntly. Why the hell are we investing in fossil fuels?
This particular, Mark Adams, Los Angeles World Airport, this particular contract is to extend our LNG agreement for 2 years for the purpose of finding a replacement vehicles for the 8 vehicles on Lois Fleet that this services. We have 5 dump trucks, 2 refuse vehicles, and a couple other larger vehicles that the LNG contract serves. And the purpose of this contract is just to extend that term for 2 years so we can find and procure in the next 2 years replacement vehicles that are zero emission for those vehicles.
Okay, so if we didn't approve this, you'd wind up using something dirtier in the meantime?
Probably, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I get this. I mean, I'm eager to push the airport as fast and aggressively as possible. I want to acknowledge that the airport has been doing some very good and very aggressive things on climate change, and I know that the airport is working on its sustainability action plan, and we're looking to see that be as robust as possible. I just want to underscore that as we do this, that as that's being worked on, that we phase out of CNG entirely as part of the plan, and hopefully with DWP making some major investments and changes to go CNG free, Lauer will be able to follow suit. So I'll support this, of course, but just want to underscore that the airport transition away from CNG, and if you could report back as part of the action plan on how you guys are going to do that as expeditiously as possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Very good. And just know, Mr. Bonin, that the EQMD and the port airport, working hand in hand with the MOU and crafting that MOU to march towards a cleaner airport moving forward.
We never want the port to be better than the airport.
It's all one city, brother. Okay, so with that direction from Mr. Bonin, we'll approve item number 4 as amended and send that to council.
And that also includes the adoption of the CO report, which has been submitted.
Without objection, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I think that was our final action item. So with that, we're now adjourned. Thank you so much.